All right, I am here with Nicole Dobroski, and we are going to do the next installment of our Scientist Spotlight series. Um, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. And before I butcher your job title, I'm going to let you share it with us because it was long and complicated when I looked it up.
Yeah, I actually kind of have two job titles. I work for a state agency in California. It's the California State Lands Commission. We're the agency in California tasked with kind of protecting the state lands in trust for the people of California. So that could mean lots of different things: natural resources protection, or development, depending on what's best for the people of California. But within that agency, I'm the assistant chief for the Marine Environmental Protection Division. Our division deals both with oil spill prevention and also prevention of marine invasive species introductions. Within that job title of assistant chief, I'm actually the manager of the California Marine Invasive Species Program. So I wear multiple hats.
Okay. I'm sure it varies hugely day to day, so maybe a typical day isn't the right question, but what does a typical week or typical month sort of look like for you? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, you're right. There is no such thing as a typical day. Let's see, our program is, we regulate the commercial ships that arrive at California ports, and we try to prevent introductions of non-indigenous species through either ballast water discharge, so that's the water that the ships hold inside the vessel to help regulate stability when they're at sea, or biofouling, so the organisms that are attached to the underside of vessels. So our job is to try to prevent their introduction to our California waters. So overall, that means that we do a lot of, we look up the available scientific research. So we do a lot of literature searches. We take that scientific research, we synthesize it, and then we try to make policy recommendations to the legislature or to our commission or other policy types. So some days we are developing regulations that will impact how the commercial shipping industry operates in California. Some days we are writing reports to the legislature and making recommendations for new laws that the legislature might pass. We have some funds that we distribute each year for research to help us understand questions that we have, policy-related or science-related questions. So sometimes we're looking at project proposals and trying to decide who we want to fund. Sometimes we actually do get to go out in the field. We're not solely at our desks. So we get to go on board the ships and take ballast water samples or fouling samples, seeing what types of technologies are out there to treat these organisms. So my scientific staff get to go out in the field more than I do at this point. I'm kind of at the managerial level, so I do a lot more of the budget change proposals and legislative work. But they do get out, maybe once a week, once a month, depending on their specific duties, and get on board the ships, which is kind of cool to go board the big container ships, the big tankers that come into ports around the world.
So for the scientific staff, do you guys run a lab that they bring the samples back to and analyze, or do you sort of work with university scientists for that sort of wet bench type of science?
Both. So we do some work with the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. They have a lab down in the San Francisco Bay Area. They also have a lab back east that we work with them. We work with San Jose State University and the Moss Landing Marine Lab system. California Maritime Academy down in Vallejo, they have a shipboard lab, so we work with them. We also have a very, very small lab. We're not really set up as a laboratory type agency, but we have various microscopes. We can run samples and look at plankton concentrations and identify certain populations. So we can do the basics. If we need more kind of bacterial analysis, plate growouts, then we contract out and work with universities. We don't have those facilities.
Yep. What do you like best about your job? What's your favorite thing aspect of it?
Couple things. I mean, I like the variety, that, I never really know what I'm going to get. Life is like a box of chocolates. I like that I can have a direct influence on policy and establishing laws and regulations that are better for the environment of California. I mean, a lot of, you hear that legislators are the one writing the laws, but it really is kind of the background staff that write the laws. And so a lot of times, I can point to parts of California law that I have written. I mean, it's sponsored by a legislator, but I've written it.
That's very
so it's kind of cool because you can directly see an influence. And even lately, I've been working with our congressional staff on influencing laws at the federal level. And so I can see some language that I've written there starting to show up in draft federal bills. And so it's kind of neat that I can sit in my office, you know, in Sacramento and know that I'm influencing both state law and federal law. You know, and I feel like I'm doing a good thing to protect the waters of California. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. So before we get any more detailed, could you back up and just tell us a little bit about your background and your academic trajectory? I think you might have told me you at one point were pre-med, so sort of maybe back up to undergrad or even earlier if you always knew, and just tell us how you got to where you are.
So I'm a California native, grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I went to Pomona College in Southern California. It's a small liberal arts college, probably pretty similar to Boston College. I came in as pre-med. I wanted to go be a pediatrician. So I was declared a biology major. You know, I started taking all the necessary pre-med classes. And then sophomore year in college, I was taking a combination of organic chemistry and cellular and molecular biology. And I realized I was either going to have a nervous breakdown or fail one of the courses. And I said, what am I doing with my life? This is maybe not where I want to be headed. And I had an advisor in college who had heard of this program back east called the Williams College Mystic Seaport Maritime Studies Program.
I've heard of that one.
Yes. And so I said, okay, I'll go back east for a semester and learn about the ocean. So we learned about, you know, literature, history, science, policy of the sea. And it was an amazing experience. And while there, I worked with Dr. James T. Carlton, who taught us about invasive species, what they are. And so that started me on my trajectory towards studying invasive species. I said, okay, I'm not going to be a doctor. I was bit by the invasive species bug. So after I finished my biology degree at Pomona, I worked for a year as a lab technician just to kind of take a year off. I started grad school at Northeastern University in Boston. Had a advisor that didn't quite mesh with, which sometimes happens in grad school. So ended up leaving Northeastern. At the same time, a job opened up with the Williams Mystic program. So I moved down to Mystic and then said, I want to continue my graduate studies working on invasive species. So I ended up at University of Rhode Island. I got a master's in biological sciences, and my thesis was on invasive crabs in New England. And then when I finished school, I got a job for a year with Sea Grant, working on a ballast outreach project, trying to teach the shipping industry about how ballast water moves invasive species around the world. And then from there, one of the advisory folks on that outreach group was working for the state of California and said, you should really come work for me. And so I've been with the state of California now for 11 years. And I've just worked my way up the ladder. I started as an environmental scientist, then became a senior environmental scientist, and then became program manager about 5 years ago.
Cool. That's awesome.
Here I am.
Just so my students are familiar, the way that I know you, of course, is that I also did that same Williams program, and you were my marine science TA, and I was lucky enough to be able to help you with some of that crab research when I was an undergrad. And that's one thing, my students often are really curious about how people get research experience as an undergrad. So other than the Williams Mystic program, did you have, you mentioned taking a year off working as a lab tech after undergrad. Did you do any research projects as an undergrad at Pomona?
I did at Pomona, we have a choice as a senior of doing either a thesis that's a literature review thesis or an actual research thesis. And so I chose, most students chose to do the literature review because it's shorter, it's a semester, it's a little easier. I did a research thesis. So I spent the summer between junior and senior year in college doing research all summer. I was looking at thermotolerance of some native and invasive mussel species. So I did some research then and spent all of senior year writing it up and working on it. And I ended up presenting it at some scientific conferences. It was a really good learning experience. So
cool.
Led me to go to graduate school. So.
Awesome. Yeah. So back to the current work that you are doing. some of my students were specifically interested in what types of invasive species you are finding, which ones you're most concerned about. There was one question about, if you could name the invasive species that you think is the most problematic in North America right now. Is there a single one?
Yes and no. I mean, certainly in the aquatic realm, especially related to commercial ships, everyone talks about zebra and quagga mussels. They came to Great Lakes and ballast water. They've been moving across the country on as fouling on kind of more small recreational vessels. We found them in California maybe 10 years ago. That's not a big issue in California from the commercial shipping standpoint, because those are freshwater species, and most of the ships coming in California ports are obviously coming through the ocean, so that they're not going to move around that way. We're kind of a different program in California. That we do have programs in California that are species specific through a different agency that targets and manages species of concern. We're a vector management program, so we deal less with the specific species that are on board the vessels and more trying to take a holistic approach to preventing anything from coming in. Prevention from our perspective is the key, because once species are in, especially in the aquatic environment, it's almost impossible to eradicate them.
Okay, so you're not focused on dealing with them once they're there. You're really focused on preventing them from from even taking hold. Okay.
Right. So, we do surveys of species that are out there with our sister agencies, and we do try to track and see if there's a reduction in the number of new species. But our specific program is focused on the prevention side of things and not so much on response once they're here.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you obviously work with a lot of different types of people that are involved in this sort of work at all different levels. Do you see, what sort of either emerging types of jobs in the field, whether it's for students who might be interested in this, there's the, traditional research pathway, there's more of the applied policy. What's sort of the spectrum of jobs related to this that you see and work with?
I mean, there's a lot of different opportunities, and it really depends where your interest lies. We work regularly with the Smithsonian group down in the San Francisco Bay Area, and so they, most of their staff there are either have bachelor's or master's in some form of biology or environmental science, and so they're kind of doing the hands-on research side of things. We work a lot with environmental organizations who are, trying to ensure protection of the environment, and so they probably most of their staff have science backgrounds, but are now taking more of an outreach kind of policy applied approach to, to environmental advocacy. There are lots of jobs with the state of California. Some of them are very hands-on science oriented, where, you need a PhD and, you're doing actual research. My type of position works well with a master's, so I have a good, solid scientific background, but I've learned a lot through I learned a lot about policy on the job. So I came in really as a scientist. And so then I learned my policy side of things once I got here. But pretty much all my staff either have bachelor's or master's in some kind of environmental scientist or biology degree. But there's any number of jobs with the state through air science, soil science, water quality analysis, any kind of scientific type degree or background, you can find a job with the state. It just depends what type of stuff you want to get involved in.
So one question I've been asking all of the scientist spotlights I've been doing is, what advice do you have for current bio majors who maybe aren't sure exactly what they want to do, but from your point of view, if you were either talking to yourself as an undergrad or talking to current undergrads, what are the things what advice do you have for them to sort of prepare themselves for a future in biology?
I think just kind of think beyond the standard career. You go to a small liberal arts college and you think, okay, I'm either going to go into business, I'm going to go into law, I'm going to go into medicine, or, kind of the well-known post professional careers, law, something like that. There are so many jobs out there that you don't hear about at probably at the school you're at right now. Ask to shadow someone at an agency, whether it be state or federal, if you have any interest. Get involved in volunteer projects to find out about kind of local level environmental work. Find a scientific researcher and just talk to them about what's their what was their career path?
Yeah.
You'll see plenty of academics that had a very typical career path, went from undergrad to grad, but there's lots of folks who went and worked on a ship for a couple of years, and then they tried out environmental education and they taught kindergarten, and then they said, no, I want to go over here. And so there's a lot of career paths, and it's nice to think when you're an undergrad that, oh, I know exactly I'm going to go do this, but a lot of it doesn't, a lot of people don't exactly follow that straight line. And so it's okay to meander along the way, and, you'll get there eventually.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. Thanks a lot. So I asked you, sorry, I'm switching gears a little bit now. I asked you what you like about your job. Are there things that that you don't particularly love about your job? What are the sort of downsides to the kind of work you do?
Certainly downsides in working for a government, probably state or federal, is that, I can say what the best available science is, but there's always the political side of things. So, I might want to go to direction A, but politics wants me to go to direction B. And so what I'm trying to do then is sway them so that we find some happy middle ground. That doesn't always, happen. I mean, certainly we're seeing that at the federal level right now, that, a lot of scientists are talking about climate change, and there's not a lot of support for that at the federal level right now. So there's the politics can get challenging at times, especially the higher up you go, the more you're kind of exposed to the politics.
Yeah.
Me personally, I loved teaching. I was a teaching assistant at Williams Mystic, and I don't get to do a lot of that these days. So I kind of miss that a little bit, but I find ways to, do a little here and there. I'll do lectures at the local universities, or, even teach my daughter's kindergarten class sometimes, just so, I get a little chance to work with students. But overall, I enjoy it a lot. It's, every now and then there's always kind of, you have bad days, you have good days, just like any job.
So we've been talking in class about climate change and conservation biology, and it's hard not to get down and depressed. Do you have a success story that you could leave us with? Something that you've, that has happened through your work that you're really proud of, that made you feel like you were making positive change, sometime in the last few years?
Yeah, definitely. So, the last 25, 30 years, both the federal government, state governments, internationally have been really focused on ballast water as a vector of invasive species. And yet, this whole time, we've kind of been ignoring biofouling, the animals and plants living on the underside of vessels, even though we've known about biofouling since, historically, since boats entered the water. There's always been some kind of biofouling.
Yep.
And so it's been a challenge to get traction to start to develop policies. We, over the last 8 years, have been working to develop biofouling management regulations. And actually, just this past summer, we finally got them approved. And now we're the first state in the country and one of the first government entities in the world that is implementing biofouling management requirements in California. So it's been a long process. It's been about 8 or 9 years. We've collected a lot of data. We've funded a lot of research. We've gone through multiple kind of rulemaking regulatory processes, but we did it, and now we're implementing it, and it's like, wow, we've done something that no one else in the country's been able to do, and that's awesome.
That is awesome. So what are some of those regulations? How do you fight biofouling?
Some of it's honestly just requiring best management practices. Like, there are anti-fouling coatings that you can put on the paint your vessel with that will deter organism attachment or get them to slip off once they're in the water.
Yeah.
And most vessels use them, but not all of them. And a lot of them use them on the sides of the vessel where kind of there are flow issues that impact how fast they go through the water, but they don't use them on the little niche areas, the crevices around propellers and all those areas. And that's where harbors large amounts of species. So we're now requiring vessels to use some kind of management practice, the best coatings available in those areas. And then they have to document them. They'll have a record book. They'll have to have a management plan on board specifying what they're doing. And then they have to report to us once a year on what they're doing. And we'll be collecting data. Hopefully over time, we'll start to strengthen the requirements, make them a little bit more specific to, how many organisms can be where. But for right now, it's a victory even kind of setting requirements for best management practices and requiring reporting. So
Cool. I think I think that's all the specific questions. Um, Anything else have we missed any major parts of what you do on a day-to-day basis, or what things that one more question. What do you think, what's the next big project for you? So now that you've got that biofouling success, what are you most focused on right now?
Ballast water discharge standards. They've been implemented internationally and federally. California has the strictest standards in the world, and that's a pro and a con. If they're too strong and there aren't any technologies to meet those standards, then that's not necessarily a good thing either. So right now we're trying to find that balance between what is most protective, but what do the existing technologies allow vessels to actually do? And so it's a tough nut to crack. We've been working on it for years, and we're still kind of trying to figure it out.
Okay, cool. If any students have specific questions for you, is there a way that they can follow up with you?
Sure. Feel free to give them my email address or phone number. I talk to students all the time through the Williams Mystic program and lots of other groups, and I'm happy to, it can be hard getting a foot in the door in government. A lot of it, unfortunately, is who you know. But reach out to me, reach out to others, because a lot of us are really happy to help students trying to get a foot in the door. You just need to kind of take that initial step and reach out to us. So.
That's great. Nicole Dobroski, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to sharing this with my students.
Happy to be here.